Your parents were too busy. Your education let you down. People told you culture wasn't for you. But you're not stupid, and this stuff's really interesting. Join us for some drinking and thinking about the best of 5,000 years of human civilization. After all, it belongs to you.
After what is a considerable and momentous night out of democratic change, mandates...
And indeed drinking.
And indeed drinking, much as the early Athenians would rise in the Attican dawn to climb up the hill that is the Acropolis and vote. We stayed up all night. We closed the windows. We butted the doors, and we stayed in North Islington to watch the results of the election. It was epic.
Can I have your reaction? In a word? In a noise? Mate, you sound absolutely terrible. So just to fill in our listeners, it's the 2019 election. We've had the usual election night party. Champagne and whiskey and other hard liquors have been flowing.
We have every single night, regardless of the election, whether it aligns with our we're Democrats more than we are partisan people. Like we celebrate all night the
celebration of democracy,
celebration
of the sort that was finally destroyed by someone that we're going to be talking about today. You've had a little catnap, although I think that's maybe made things worse. I've been awake solidly, and I don't know
who I am.
all completely wired.
And I've got a cheeky hour and a half, which could possibly maybe feel worse.
It was a schoolboy.
But I have things to do this evening.
Yeah,
which you don't. So.
Well, I'm going to carry on drinking. I'm going to a party.
And that's my problem. I'm not. I have to go
just sober up
and sober up and listen to something. It's going to be great. It's going to be
good job we're not recording a podcast, isn't it?
It's a privilege to have you here.
Yeah, well, it must be a real privilege because I happen to know that when you turned 33, there was a sort of momentous moment in your life, and famously, you sat down beneath a picture that you've got of me and cried your eyes out because you knew that you'd reached that age and you had not achieved anything in your life, whereas I was triumphant. And
well, to be clear, you somewhat mistake the story. At 33, I did realise that I was now older than Alexander, but
when he died,
conquered the world.
Yeah.
In a year, I would be older than Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart and not have yet composed his work. And I was, in fact, the same age as Christ and had yet not redeemed the world. So a small midlife crisis, not as small as yours. What did you do when you were 33 in your sort of way of coping with the older than Alexander moment that we all have?
We all have it. Yeah, so I walked out of a very successful, lucrative career and decided to write my masterpiece, which has not yet had quite the international acclaim that it clearly deserves.
And the listeners who haven't listened to not just our special edition pilot,
but
the special edition pilot. This is referring to one of Alistair's 2 books that he's written. That
Prospero's Mirror.
That none of you would have read. I have
59p from all bad bookshops.
And I haven't even finished reading the second one of them.
You haven't finished reading the second one? What? We've already done the podcast about it.
I've read the one that we did the podcast, Gal.
Oh, God.
Yeah, the only thing is, it's not actually terrible. I'm just reading it as a sort of burden.
You've heard it here first. Not actually terrible.
No. Yeah, if I picked it up for 59p, I might as well have been engaged with it. But the fact that, I had to buy it full price on Amazon and then write a review that I loved it, is making a complex relationship with that.
Only one review, just for the record.
Fine, you're 100% 5 stars. I've not read this book, but...
So basically what you're saying is it's a good job that I did not die at the age of 33. It's a good job that I've got something left in the tank.
I'm not sure I am saying that. I'm saying that no matter how bad that book was, I'm not sure you're going to do any better.
I wouldn't have had the consolation that Alexander the Great must have felt as he lay there in Babylon.
I wish I'd written
chucking his guts up.
An undersold book on Amazon.com.
For a man who is a man, work, in my belief, if it is directed to noble ends, has no object beyond itself. Nonetheless, if any of you wish to know what limit may be set on this particular campaign, let me tell you that the area of country still ahead of us, from here to the Ganges in the Eastern Ocean, is comparatively small. Our ships will sail round from the Persian Gulf to Libya as far as the Pillars of Hercules, from where all Libya to the eastward will soon be ours, and all Asia too. And to this empire there will be no boundaries but what God himself has made for the whole world.
So Alexander died, it is suspected, of massive alcohol poisoning. because the man was a great thinker and drinker. I think we should salute him for that. It was a good effort. It's worth mentioning what we're drinking here, which is also extremely relevant to what we're going to be talking about, because this is a drink that you invented called Double Gin and Rubicon, which, listeners, you can make this very, very easily and cheaply. You can take gin or any other hard liquor, to be honest.
What liquor was this, gin?
Yeah, it's Gordon's.
Oh.
And then just add it to, you can go, basically any corner shop will sell you these lovely, surprisingly refreshing, I wouldn't call them fruit drinks, because I don't think much fruit has gone
just
into
to be
them.
clear, any corner shop in London or Brighton, actually beyond the capital.
It's hard to source. But you could probably get it on the internet
in any
in bulk.
conservative held seat in the country, which is most of the seats in the country, it might be more difficult to get.
All the terrifying parts of the country that I never visit. We've done some tasting, and I would recommend, if you need something to really pep you up, I'd go for the mango flavour, which is what you're drinking. But something a bit subtler for for the more sophisticated palate, I think the guava is probably the winner. Yeah. But you just describe the moment when you created this cocktail, because there was an interesting but much neglected moment in military history that is associated with this drink. Yeah, because do you remember it was our friend Guy's stag do, and we've been drinking quite heavily for some time.
You need to pick them.
A little sort of corpse reviver. So you invented this double gin and Rubicon, and you were showing off, I think is the way to describe it, at the bar as you were ordering this. You decided to slip into Latin, and you have form for this, because you got your Latin GCSE, and you're very proud about that. You slipped into Latin, and we were in quite a low dive, I think you could say, and the gentleman standing next to you at the bar took exception, I think, to your use of Latin. Presumably...
he doesn't like foreigners.
But it may well
Romans
have been...
or
absolutely. He was a sort of, woad-wearing nutter, wasn't he? And he basically started on you.
Yeah.
And he was waiting for you when you left the club later on with his sidekick, whom I bravely faced up to the sidekick.
Not quite how I remember it.
And you'd had a few more Rubicons than me. And basically we got into it's the only time it's ever happened to me at any rate, we got into a kind of classic bar fight scenario, which ended, I managed to, using my diplomatic skills, I managed to diffuse the situation on my flank, but on your flank, the night ended with you running down the road, having been ignominiously beaten up by a woman who was about half your size.
Well, okay, so, you ended the evening by...
Tactical retreat, I think you described it
by
at the time.
kicking off, and as I ran down the road, shouted, Carthago delenda est, I believe. Yeah,
It wasn't your finest moment.
Well, except I created this new drink, and rather like when we went to the Stuart Lee thing, and they'd run out of tonic, and we had to get gin and bitter lemons. The Stewie Lee.
Stewie Lee. I'd have made some of those if we'd had any of those.
Yeah, so when you say it wasn't my finest moment, what you're saying is I wasn't supported. Lepidus here failed to provide troops to Caesar when he was needed.
I was going to say Parmenion's your Alexander, but there you go. I'll
take
Lepidus.
Lepidus to my Caesar. And on that occasion, Antony had a go, but he still was defeated.
Now, I invented a cocktail as well, which I think would have been very suitable for a moment like this, where we are feeling, as you can probably tell from our voices, quite rough. Which is something which I call the bowel buster. Yeah. And what it is you get a Yakult. You know what Yakult is.
I'm aware.
Put in a couple of vodkas, stir it round, and then you get one of those Varroca vitamin tablets, like vitamin bombs, that dissolve.
Oh yeah.
Whack it in there, fizzes up, knock it back. Happy days.
Why aren't we drinking this morning?
It absolutely sorts you out. Basically, it deals with every distinct part of your hangover. Now, I wouldn't pretend that from a flavour perspective, it's necessarily the most rewarding drink, but it is an absolute lifesaver. And I'm amazed that that Yakult haven't got onto this and that they don't produce it themselves.
So if you're listening, Mr. Yakult,
Mr. Yakult, well, yeah, maybe, who knows? Yeah. Doesn't Yakult mean something in Japanese? I don't know. Well, write in if you know the answer to that.
Please don't. We won't be. Right.
So back to the Rubicon.
Just be clear, for our listeners who have no idea what Rubicon... we said this is relevant, and we're talking about it's relevant because it's the Rubicon. Why is this relevant?
So the Rubicon is a small river in Italy which described the edge of traditional Roman territory within which Roman legions were not allowed to march. So generals could not take their...
The home territory.
It was like the home territory, right.
Yeah. Rome itself.
Yeah. and you couldn't bring troops into that area without becoming an enemy of the state. And at a moment of grand historical significance, Julius Caesar famously decides to cross the Rubicon with his legions, sparking an inevitable Europe-wide civil war, destroying the Roman Republic and ending up with himself as dictator for life and effectively the first of the Roman emperors.
Yeah,
well, to be discussed.
Effectively. Famously, as he crosses it, he has this great line. He says, in Latin, "Jacta aliest, the die is cast."
Yeah.
It's all going to go brilliantly, or it's going to go.
I remember you explaining that to that knuckle dragger in the bar on Whitby's stag do, and it didn't go brilliantly, did it? It didn't work out for you there. That particular roll of the dice didn't end up.
That, regardless of what you do and where you are in a dive bar, I mean, you have a rudimentary understanding of Latin and the historical context of some of the major.
I don't think it was too much to ask. If that gentleman had listened to this podcast, then he wouldn't have felt so threatened by your use of Latin. Or possibly, maybe he was actually objecting. Have you considered this? To maybe he did know Latin and he was objecting to your use of whatever text. Maybe you got it wrong. Have you considered that?
Well, I haven't got it wrong, but he might have been saying that much as this drink is great, perhaps comparing it to Caesar's momentous action is inappropriate. And maybe he took offence at that. I mean, we'll never know.
We will never know.
Unless you're listening.
In which case, fuck you.
Yeah.
I could take you,
you
pussy.
No.
Come on, think you harder.
And
all the other things we said as we ran like the bloody hell away.
Your journey has clearly been a long one, but we welcome you, and Carthago to lend S.
So, I mean, clearly you were obsessed with Julius Caesar. You have been for a long time. I'm obsessed with Alexander the Great. As you say, we've struggled at various points in our lives with the fact that we haven't necessarily yet quite lived up to the billing, shall we say. But we're not the only people. I mean, the man who's just been elected Prime Minister of this country, big Plutarch fan, big fan of Pericles. I've got a picture of him there wearing a Periclean helmet. The really fascinating thing is that the two people we're talking about today, Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, they themselves were obsessed with great men of the past. Julius Caesar was obsessed with Alexander the Great and was deliberately and openly trying to emulate him because of the books that he'd read.
Okay, so today we are talking about Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar. And actually it's apt because most of we both have classical history. I think we both have a top spot, despite what we're talking about. For you, you've always struggled in the shadow of Alexander.
Yeah.
And I think I've always struggled in the shadow. Well, my relation's complicated because Augustus is my great hero. But I understand that Augustus can only exist because of Julius Caesar.
Yeah,
and so.
And if they'd been on the other side from each other, Caesar would have taken Augustus.
It depends on the context. I mean, that's difficult.
Right.
But the Julio-Claudians, those first two.
Would you say they were the best emperors? I mean, let's give it to Suetonius that Julius Caesar was an emperor. Let's assume that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Trajan, I raise you Trajan.
Yeah, well, the emperors of a different type. I think they have to be treated differently. But the Caesarean Revolution, if you want to call it.
I suppose they set the whole thing up.
Yeah,
didn't
the
they?
Caesarean Revolution, for me, is that epic turning point of history. Not to suggest that Alexander the Great wasn't. It's the turning point of history that I'm interested in. And you're also interested in the other turning point, which was slightly before that. Yeah. But they are both great turning points. And I think it is interesting that the people responsible for the one that I'm fascinated in admire the people responsible for the one.
Right, so this is interesting. That's a very good point. Would we have had Julius Caesar without Alexander? Would he have done what he did? Because there's this wonderful story about how, as a 33-year-old, I think in another version he's 40, so there's some hope for us here. He basically has achieved fuck all so far in his life, and he's out in Spain somewhere, and there's a statue of Alexander the Great, and he sits down underneath it, and he cries. He cries like a baby. He cries like you were crying on Whitby's stag do at the end of the night. He cries because he hasn't achieved anything yet. He's clearly read the lives of Alexander, not the ones that we're going to talk about, but the sources for the ones we're going to talk about. He sort of kept Alexander as something to compare himself to throughout his life. At the end of his life, he was about to invade Parthia, Iraq, basically, in the footsteps of Alexander. He was going to try and do the same thing, and that was what he was sort of planning and building up to at the moment of his assassination.
That always goes so well.
Yeah, always. Iraq and Afghanistan, two great places to invade. Although, to be fair, Alexander did manage to win and hold them. And Alexander, similar, wherever he went, he slept with a copy of the Iliad under his pillow, we're told. And he also loved quoting from Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides, who we've talked about in previous podcasts, and indeed Herodotus, who we're also going to talk about. Napoleon would model himself on both of these people and would take books about both of them with him wherever he went on his campaigns. And I always keep a copy of Prospero's Mirror by A.N. Donaldson under my bed. In fact, I keep hundreds of copies under my bed because we've got so many unsold ones. Don't know where to put them.
And to be fair, I actually have a number of copies, and I keep them, or just off my bedroom. I have an ensuite bathroom.
Thanks, mate.
And
highly absorbent.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's just I love this idea. This is one of the things I love about the ancient world is the way that the people in the ancient world shamelessly mythologize themselves.
Yeah.
And one criticism of the books that we're talking about today, which are not really history books, they're biographies, or in one case, autobiography, is that they wouldn't pass muster today as academic works of history. But they weren't supposed to be. First, Plutarch starts off his Life of Alexander by saying, I'm not trying to write history, I'm trying to write biography. This is where biography was created first. This is the first biography we have, really. Also, the characters that we're hearing about were themselves trying to create a mythological story of their own lives. So I'm not sure it's true to say, oh, well, we have to take this with a pinch of salt, because when we hear that Alexander insisted on being the first man to jump off the boats when they invaded Asia, crossing the Hellespont, which we're going to swim, hopefully, if I can persuade you to get into shape. He visited Troy because he was in the footsteps of Achilles, who is his hero from Homer, who we've talked about in a previous podcast, ran naked 3 times round the grave mound that Achilles was deemed to have been buried in, which is still there, by the way, and I have done this. I have run bollock naked 3 times in the footsteps of Alexander, in the footsteps of Achilles, around that mound.
With these people, they
horrible chafing. I couldn't see anything like it. It was a very hot day.
But they were so keen to link themselves to the stories of the past that rather than they allow it to be sort of mythologized by the biographers, they actually did it. They sort of pointedly and deliberately mirrored their lives to those of the ones of the past. So rather than it being a sort of fictional conceit or biographical conceit, oh well, this person did this thing. They did it in order to make sure that their biographers would draw an allusion or parallel.
Yeah, I mean, for example, when he's dying, Caesar took care, says Plutarch, and I think Suetonius as well, to arrange his toga in such a way that he wouldn't be showing too much thigh, because that might make him look a bit ridiculous when he was a dead body. And he was careful not to cry out. He wanted to die heroically, and he had said that to people in the days leading up to the assassination. It's fascinating. This is not someone who wanted to die ignominiously, in an old people's home. He wanted to go out on a high, and he was. I'm not saying he was delighted by the way it rolled out, but actually I think he probably would take that. So yeah, it's very difficult to disentangle the history and the myth, but I think that's because of these are 2 of the supreme individuals of history. And one thing we're very careful. This is a podcast about books, so we could talk forever about Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar. We're not here to talk about the history of it. We're here to talk about the books that describe them and which ones we think need to be saved because they're the most brilliant books, some of the most brilliant books of all time. So we'll start with Alexander. He took he didn't write anything himself that survives, except I think there's one letter that is plausibly by him because he was too busy kicking ass around the world, but he did take a historian with him, a sort of court historian, to record everything he was saying and doing, to write it up.
Well, mine is sitting in the corner as we speak. Hi, Nigel.
Exactly.
Everywhere I go, I take a historian. Yeah,
absolutely. Biographers of the future as well. Once they've invented time machines, come back and follow us around. Yeah, and this is fascinating because we don't have Callisthenes. We don't have the history anymore. But what he wrote was used by subsequent historians that were used by Arrian a few hundred years later. Yeah. Unfortunately, he fell out with Alexander halfway around when Alexander started to take on some of the trappings of the empire that he was building. Callisthenes basically refused to bow to him because he considered that a shameful thing for a Greek to have to do. And he went up to kiss him. These Greeks were a bit odd. Kiss each other on the lips as a sign of social equality between men. And you could do that with Alexander during the first years of his reign, even though he was the king. And basically, this didn't go down too well with the later Alexander, who had started to become the emperor of the world. And it didn't end too well for poor old Callisthenes. And as a result of that, probably we don't have his history. But we do have a history of Arrian, who was a Greek writing a couple of hundred years later, or 300 or 400 years later, in the Roman period. He's writing in Greek, but he works for the Romans. The Romans have conquered Greece by this time. He's under the later emperors after the Julio-Claudians, and I think he was a consul in the reign of Trajan. And indeed, one of the reasons he might have been interested in Alexander the Great was precisely because Trajan was interested in Alexander the Great and was interested in trying to emulate Alexander the Great's conquest. So there's an interesting kind of parallel going on there. So Arrian, I mean, how did you find Arrian stylistically? I wouldn't say it's not Herodotus or Thucydides. We're not talking about a great stylist,
No,
but it's a straight kind of...
Yeah, straight is exactly the word. He's the thing about some of the Roman writers, Suetonius, Tacitus, and the like, is that they are engaging, they are direct. You read them, they go, "Wow, this is punchy. I can't believe it's written 2,000 years ago." Whereas Arrian, it's fine.
It's the content that drives it, isn't it, rather than the style?
Yeah, it's exciting stuff written not in a dry way that you might imagine the historical works a couple of thousand years ago, but at the same time, he would be great if it were not for the fact that there are other writers from that period who surprise us with their freshness. So, that's maybe unfair on Arrian. He's engaging about stuff which happened a couple of thousand years ago. But as you say, it's not stylistically great. It's not dull. It's just matter of fact. Yeah. And there are others who surprise us better.
Well, and we'll come to one of those others in a minute. But I think that the thing that is great about Arrian is that it is the most complete account of one of the most extraordinary events in the whole of human history, which is Alexander the Great becoming the king of a small, slightly shonky, slightly Greek kingdom on the edge of things, really, and then from there taking over the entire known world with a series of unbelievable conquests, great battles, extraordinary sieges, personal bravery, and he really did lead from the front. I mean, he literally charged into battle as the very, very front man in a wedge-shaped, cavalry formation. He was the first man in. There's a great story, and Arrian describes all the military stuff really well. It's very coherent. It's easy to understand, isn't it? So, there's a story, for example, of Alexander. There's a siege of a fortress. He climbs up the scaling ladders, and again, he's leading from the front. He gets to the top. The ladders are destroyed behind him, so he's on the walls with only a couple of soldiers, incredibly exposed suddenly. What does he do? He jumps down into the town. His loyal soldiers outside the city go completely nuts and basically find ways, however they can, of scrambling over the walls. But he is there facing the whole of the enemy army with just 2 or 3 guys. He's getting pelted with arrows, one of which goes straight through his breastplate and into his lung. So, I think there's a description of blood and air coming out. And he's still fighting. He's killing people himself. This isn't some guy who's sat in the tent in the 3 miles behind the lines. He really meant business because, as we've been saying, he was considering himself basically as a sort of Homeric hero. He was Achilles, not Agamemnon, I suppose you could say.
And he, interestingly, easy to wash all the Greek culture together and forget the divide that was the Homeric heroes being many years before him.
1,000 years before.
Yeah, indeed. But he is. When we think of Greeks, we think of Alexander the Great, Plato, Socrates, Aristotle. He was taught by Aristotle.
That's extraordinary as well.
It was just amazing. Like what? This other great person. He was his private tutor.
Isn't that amazing? You couldn't really ask for a better start in life, could you? I mean, you were a teacher. How do you think?
Well, I like to think in several thousand years, people will say, I was taught by...
Did you have any pupils that you think might go on to take over the world?
Well, a few psychopaths. They'll say, none so far. You monitor their progress, but
And I mean, Alexander clearly comes across through Arrian's writing as a very intelligent man. I mean, he's not a philosopher himself in the style of Aristotle, who taught him and who was in turn taught by Plato, who was taught by Socrates. The most extraordinary set of teacher-pupil relationships in history. But he certainly fancied himself as a thoughtful, intelligent ruler. He took with him on his conquest not just soldiers, but scientists, historians. He was interested in the world that he was conquering. He wasn't just doing it for the fame and the glory, although that was clearly very important to him. He also wanted to understand the world. One of the reasons why he just kept marching is because he wanted to get to the edge of the world to see what it looked like. And he was devastated when he couldn't quite get there, because the world turned out to be significantly bigger than Aristotle had told him. Either that or he hadn't been paying attention in double geography back in Macedon.
He got quite far.
He did, yeah. I mean, he didn't do badly, did he? It's also, there's a nice story about how another philosopher, Diogenes, who's a great cynical philosopher who used to live naked in a barrel and whack one off to make a philosophical point. Diogenes is sitting on a beach. Alexander goes to visit him. This is after Alexander becomes king. This story is told quite well. He stands over Diogenes and says and talks to him and really admires his intelligence because Alexander, is philosophically trained. And he says, "Right, I'm the king. You can have anything you want, and I'll grant your wish." And Diogenes says, "Okay, my wish is get out of my light because you're casting a shadow on me." And Alexander, he can't allow himself to lose an encounter like that. So he says, well, if I wasn't Alexander, I would be Diogenes. A great anecdote that has a ring of truth about it, doesn't it? You can just imagine this intelligent man who would have maybe gone a different way if he hadn't become king. Maybe he would have gone and become a philosopher like Aristotle. But yeah, Arrian is more interested in the military and political aspects of Alexander's life, and you do get these amazing descriptions and surprisingly clear descriptions of the great battles and sieges and campaigns.
He is good at driving the technical elements of military combat, which can often be quite a difficult thing to capture. You have to be quite skilled to write even a passable and then the army did this and this and make it engaging, and he does, and he manages it, and he's not, as I say, he's not associated to Tacitus in terms of that scurrilousness, the tabloid journals, but he's very good. How do you think that compares with, for example, the same Life of Alexander written by Plutarch?
For I am writing biography, not history. And the truth is that the most brilliant exploits often tell us nothing of the virtues or vices of the men who performed them, while on the other hand a chance remark or a joke may reveal far more of a man's character than the mere feat of winning battles in which thousands fall, or of marshalling great armies, or laying siege to cities. When a portrait painter sets out to create a likeness, he relies above all upon the face and the expression of the eyes, and pays less attention to the other parts of the body. In the same way, it is my task to dwell upon those actions which illuminate the workings of the soul, and by this means to create a portrait of each man's life.
That's the next book we're coming to, and I think it's a really interesting comparison because Plutarch is more interested, I think, or certainly better at describing Alexander as an individual and the human aspects of it, as opposed to the strategic aspects, shall we say.
It's a different approach.
It's a completely different approach.
Is a man's history what he does, or who he is?
Yeah, and Plutarch starts his Life of Alexander by saying, it's not history I'm writing, it's lives, biography. In the most glorious deeds, there's not always an indication of virtue or vice, he says. Indeed, a small thing, like a phrase or a joke, often gives you a better idea of someone's character than battles in which thousands of people die. And I think that's absolutely right. So, describing these one-liners with Diogenes, or the story of how, as a boy, he tames Bucephalus, his horse that he then has with him through most of his campaigns, by realising that the horse is spooked by his own shadow, and he tames it, which no one else has managed to do. The stories that have become famous because of the way that Plutarch has told them. And you get the story of the Gordian knot, that that there's this massive knot, basically, that with a stupid legend attached to it, that the person who can undo it will become Lord of Asia, and no one's ever been able to undo it because it's like one of those knots when you've triple knotted your shoes, and it's absolutely, it is just, there's no way around it. Well, Alexander found a way, which was just to take his sword and just chop it in half, and then of course it all unravels, and everyone's like, you're going to be master of Asia, which indeed he was. So he tells it, he tells those stories really well. Arrian, it's much more, as you say, 10,000 companion cavalry rode out on the right flank. But I think Arrian, on the other hand, does have a really good way of capturing one of the most fascinating aspects of Alexander's conquest, which is that these were conquests of parts of the world that none of the Greeks had ever been to, and they didn't really know what was there. So it's exploration and conquest at the same time. When they get to Persepolis, they've never seen anything like it, and they basically they go on a massive bender, get completely hammered, and an Athenian courtesan called Titus, who's with them, is sort of teasing them and basically challenges Alexander to burn this place down, which he does, and the destruction level is still there. This amazing capital of the Persian Empire destroyed basically because Alexander got drunk with a lady of questionable virtue. They're overwhelmed by what they see. They get to Babylon, they see the Hanging Gardens. They are astounded by the size of the population compared to any of the cities they knew in Greece. Then they go beyond and they get to Afghanistan. They encounter Amazons, they encounter the Himalayas, bigger mountains than they could possibly imagine. And then they get to India, and this really is, it's like invading Mars, basically. But what's wonderful about it is that you can tell how interested they are in it, and this really comes across from Arrian. I think Arrian's interested as well, possibly because of his links with Trajan. So, he describes how they get to the Indus, they fight against Porus, they fight against elephants, and then they build a fleet and sail down the Indus because Alexander's soldiers say, right, we're not going any further. We've marched 11,500 miles, and we still haven't got to the edge yet, so it might be time to go home. Alexander, again, the story's told very well. He's devastated, but he realises he can't push them any further. So they make a fleet, and he builds a fleet in the Indian Ocean, and they're absolutely astounded because they've never encountered proper tides before, and they come across whales, for example, which they try to fight because they think they're huge sea monsters. They've never seen anything like that before, and it's the sense of wonder but interest that you get, and they're desperate to acquire the knowledge. So actually, Arrian writes a sequel, a little-known sequel, which is the story of Nearchus, who's Alexander's admiral, and the journey that he makes up the Persian Gulf back from India while Alexander is trying to march along the coast. And they lose touch with each other. There's this huge disaster where basically Alexander leads his army into a desert because it was uncharted terrain. They didn't really know what was there, and they ran out of water, a lot of them dying. Alexander famously pours out his own water ration in front of his soldiers to prove that he's going to go through exactly the same hardships as them. They finally get to safety, and he assumes that the fleet has been lost, and then this straggly figure of Nearchus that they haven't seen for months turns up, and Alexander embraces him tearfully and says, this is wonderful.
Monty Python,
exactly.
Yeah.
And Alexander says, it's a shame about the rest of the fleet, but I'm glad you're here. And Alexander says, no, the fleet, they're just round the corner, basically. It is this amazing sense of a world opening up at the moment that the Greeks, educated as they are by people like Aristotle who are curious and want to know about the world, are eager to learn about it.
So I just want to compare that with, so Plutarch, he famously writes his Greek lives, but also he writes a Roman life, which he deliberately contrasts. So he picks a character in each that is sort of a linked with a character in the other. Now, for the Romans, who obviously went on to have a vast empire, but they are not marked by that exploratory conflict.
No.
Roman politics is far more, it takes place on a greater domestic scale, and is far more interested in the internal affairs of this person versus this person, X versus Y.
Well, you say that except possibly for Caesar. I mean, I think there was only ever one person he could match against Alexander.
Indeed, so Plutarch's answer is who's Alexander and it's Caesar. Now, for us, we're often, I suppose, in the 21st century, fascinated by Caesar, partly the Shakespeare play, but also just interested in the sort of, he's assassinated, that sort of internal history. But Caesar was a great conqueror and explorer. He just went westwards. And it's weird.
West and north.
Yeah, we're not particularly excited by the conquest of Gaul because it's France.
Well, and Kent,
But actually, these were great unknown territories. So,
Britain in particular, because it was beyond the ocean. Again, there was a sort of we landed on the moon.
I was just interested in how you thought Plutarch had sort of compared and contrasted Alexander the Great and Caesar. I mean, they are both absolute geniuses of military conquest. I don't think there'll be any denial about that. I'm a number of questions. Do you rate Caesar in the same category as Alexander the Great for conquest politics?
Right.
Success. The topic, albeit they're slightly different things. They have a lot of similarities. They are great. They are the great men of their times. They are complex sexually,
bisexually,
trisexually.
Yeah, indeed.
They are people who feel that the rules don't apply to them and act as if the rules don't apply to them.
Yeah.
And
they make the rules, don't they?
Yeah, they do. But slightly differently, because obviously Alexander, even in his death, the succession was very awkward. And whilst there were some people who was like, they were gone too far, essentially died top of his game.
Yes.
Whereas Julius Caesar was murdered by people top of his game.
Well, although, by the way, there is a theory that Alexander was poisoned, so it is not impossible that there is a greater parallel there. They were both killed, as you say, top of the game when they were about to go on to further conquests. So Alexander, he was building another fleet to go sail around Arabia, and in his mind he wanted to go around Africa, which was possible because he knew from Herodotus that Phoenician sailors had managed to go certainly a considerable way around Africa. And he wanted to basically go all the way around Africa and then invade Europe from the west. He was going to go to the Pillars of Hercules, the Straits of Gibraltar, start there and then conquer Carthage and Rome, by the way, which was starting to turn into a regional power, and then come back and end up where he'd started. He was only 33 when he died. Who knows what he could have achieved if he had not hit the bottle, hit the sauce a little bit hard when he got back to Babylon from the Gedrosian desert. Caesar was going to try and emulate Alexander by invading Parthia. The only other person you could plausibly have paired with Alexander would have been Pompey, because he conquered a lot of the successor kingdoms, the Greek successor kingdoms that came out of Alexander's empire after it collapsed upon his death, and sort of hoovered them up. But because he's in the known world, I don't think it quite competes.
Yeah.
And Caesar goes to the unknown. He crosses to Britain. He conquers Gaul. He crosses the Rhine. But he ultimately is facing. There's no way around this. Most of the fighting is against the French. And I'm sorry.
The Gauls were the Gauls the French of today? I mean, he had to fight hard, apparently.
He certainly had to fight hard, yeah.
Yeah, so unlike the French of today.
Indeed, but we're not talking about. You can when you read Caesar, you get a sense of the disorienting exoticism of, as I say, France and Kent. That's not so exotic to us. It's hard to see. It's hard to compare. It was to them, but it's hard to compare that with the extremes of crossing the Hindu Kush into an unknown continent, meeting animals you've never seen.
They met men with long beards painted blue,
right? And moustaches, by the way. We wore moustaches back then. The ancient Britons, which is quite nice to read in Caesar. Whereas, as you say, yeah. Also, Alexander is attacking a giant empire from a small,
which he doesn't know where it ends,
and he doesn't even know where it ends or how big it is. He's fighting against armies that are massively bigger than his, but also more sophisticated. The Romans haven't
conquered Europe, but they had a sense.
They had a rough sense of it, yeah. And it's a game changer. I mean, I think there's an argument. I don't see how, if Alexander hadn't existed, how you could really claim that the Greeks were going to take over most of the known world and spread Greek culture in the way that they did, that changed the world.
And still have, you find these strange sort of Indian settlements which are still in the debt of. There
were kingdoms out in the Hindu Kush which were sort of Greco-Buddhist kingdoms going on for hundreds of years. There was a real exchange of cultures and ideas between India and Persia and the Greek world, and Egypt, by the way, as well. There's another place that Alexander conquered. And you don't really get that with Caesar. And I'm afraid to say, even talking about Pompey and the other Roman generals of the era, clearly there were a series of generals fighting it out, so the best ones were likely to be successful, and what they were doing were going out to get new bits of land so that they could build themselves up, and they build up their power base for reasons of domestic politics, effectively, and so they could seize riches. If Caesar hadn't done it, Pompey or someone else would have done it. So I just think, great respect to Caesar, man's a complete legend, but I just think you can't quite. And also, Alexander did it in 10 years.
Caesar was the man of the hour. Who happened to do something which would have happened, but I think, as you say, Alexander was a person who grew up in not even really Greece, right? The mountainous, regions, and he's like, I ended up going, well, I'm going to set off with an army and conquer the world until there's no more world.
Yes,
and he did,
and he's described as weeping when he realises there are no more worlds to conquer, and then although one version of the story is that some Indian philosopher says, oh yeah, but look at the moon and there are other planets, and he's crying because he can't get there. He wants to conquer those as well. Yeah, it's so yeah. I mean, we're talking about supreme individuals. And by the way, I do think that it just obviously lays to rest the theory that the grand, the great characters of history don't have an influence, and it's all. It's just obviously not true in this. In these eras.
Was that day, I mean, without Alexander.
Yeah, it's hard to say that this is,
But what is Alexander's lasting impact other than as an inspiration to people like Caesar and ourselves?
Well, for example, he built the city of Alexandria. In fact, he built dozens of Alexandrias, which is still there today as a major city throughout the ancient world. It was a place of great learning, which it wouldn't have been if Alexander hadn't gone to Egypt and there hadn't been a meeting of the cultures of Egypt and Greece and Persia and Babylon and India, as I say. He was genuine. He wasn't just a military conqueror. He attracted to his court thinkers and philosophers who met. The Greek philosophers that he took with him were fascinated by the Indian philosophers that they met. There was a genuine exchange of ideas there. And he also, which I think is really powerful, and this comes out of in Arrian and in Plutarch, although curiously they disapprove of it, he realises that he can't just run this as a Greek empire with a small number of Greeks sitting on top of these huge cultures that they've conquered, and nor can he just turn himself into the next Persian king of kings. He has to create a genuine cultural fusion, and he deliberately sets about doing so by having mass weddings between his soldiers and Iranian princesses and aristocratic women, and teaching the next generation a kind of hybrid Greco-Persian culture. That is amazingly far-sighted, and that's why, even though he died so young and didn't sort out the succession, famously, as they leant over him as he was dying, they said, "Oh God, you're dying. Who's going to take over?" And he just said, "The strongest." It's a good answer, isn't it?
Helpful, yeah.
And sure enough, they all fight it out, but it doesn't all collapse, even though they're fighting it out.
But I want to go back to the point we made before, which was we are not here to talk about the lives of Alexander,
sure, we're here to talk about the
lives of Caesar. Yeah. So how are we going to compare Plutarch on Caesar, Caesar on Caesar, Arrian on Alexander? As we come to the end of the Alexander bit, before we go on and let's say look in more detail on the Romans, come to the end of the Greeks. What is, for the discerning reader who really doesn't have that much time but wants to read one book, where should they start? Where should they go? Which is the best?
I mean, I say this reluctantly because I love Arrian, and it is a source for so much that we wouldn't have if we didn't have it about the life of Alexander. But as a book, as you say, for stylistic reasons, I think you've got to go for the Plutarch. The Plutarch's lives are very short, by the way. We're only talking, 40 or 50 pages. Yeah. And it's a cracking read. It's so vivid. It's so well written. It's so exciting. It's got all these stories. It makes you think that you know the guy as a human being to some extent. It's absolutely inspirational. It has been inspirational ever since.
Well, I think, there's a cheat there, isn't it? Which is Plutarch's Greek lives are deliberately designed to act as a companion volume to Roman lives.
Right.
I mean, they're not supposed to be read independent of each other.
No, indeed.
And obviously, by answering Plutarch now is sort of pre-voting Plutarch into the next stage.
Yes.
But if one could take them as a single volume,
I think even then you probably would. And by the way, interestingly, one of the things that Plutarch's trying to do is, because he's a Greek living in the Roman Empire, he's basically saying, look, we're just as good as you. Look at all these great Greeks that happened, that were doing all this stuff hundreds of years ago, and bring out your top 11. I'll match them with the top 11 Greeks. I was inspired by this to pursue a similar project. I was going to do, and I started writing this. I spent about half a year doing it. And
how far did you get with Welsh lives?
Yeah, no. So it was parallel lives, Brits versus Americans. Right, this was a sort of answer to Americans who think they're more important than us. Bring out your top 11. We'll do better. I stopped after one because it turns out, funnily enough, you try to write this stuff. It's actually really hard to write. A huge amount of research goes in, and you have to condense it down and then make it entertaining.
So, who was your?
So I started with John Locke, who we'll come to in a subsequent podcast.
And who was he being compared against?
Yeah, against Thomas Jefferson. Although I never got as far as writing about Jefferson, and I ended up I just after weeks of research, I ended up just writing pointlessly about John Locke's bowels and his bowel problems and how they compared with those of the subsequent British empirical philosopher David Hume, who had similar but different bowel problems. This was not one of my more successful literary ventures.
Well, I mean, it was unpublished and not read by anyone, and therefore one might argue is probably the most successful, most deserving of your literary.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, so how did you find the Plutarch? And you know a lot about Caesar.
Yeah,
we're going to have
so for me, I've always been more interested in the Romans, and that's not to say that I'm not fascinated by the Greeks or it's just the Romans and that sort of military history bit has always been a bit of a passion of mine. So obviously the big hitters in Plutarch's life. So you come to Alexander, you go, oh yeah, I know about Alexander, but it was quite interesting to see some of the ones that were lesser hitters in my mind.
Right.
Not least of all because probably the lesser Greeks were I came to realise were more important for world history than the lesser Romans. So
the lives of Pericles, Alcibiades, those are fantastic reads, aren't they? They really are cracking.
Absolutely superb. So, as a sort of introduction to world history and understanding where our culture comes from, absolutely fantastic. And I say, those lesser Romans are less important, although we may have a more cultural affinity. I think the British education system, for all its flaws, I don't know what it's still like, is still better at introducing us to Romans and Greeks.
Interesting.
I don't know whether it's an imperial hangover, but I think we're slightly more comfortable with Caesar and Pompey and Crassus. And
I dropped Latin and carried on with Greek, so I feel the
there's no option to do that at my school. You could do classics such as Greek and Latin, or you could do Latin.
That's a shame. You should have done both. I should have done both. I don't know what we were thinking.
Well, I did do Greek at university.
Yeah, and we've talked about this before. 38%.
Yeah, or on my second attempt, 42%, or as I like to call it, a pass.
I mean, but the other thing...
First past the post.
First past the post. You just need to get over the line. The other thing about the Plutarch lives, as you say, you can get a really good sense of the whole of classical history, all the juiciest bits, basically, and you can see where, for example, Shakespeare gets a lot of it, all the ancient world plays that he writes are pretty much all of them based on Plutarch, and you can see why, because Plutarch tells such cracking stories. It's high drama, isn't it? It's absolutely mythologizing characters who were such big characters that they deserve the treatment that he gives.
It's highly recommended. I mean, Plutarch is highly recommended, and if we could count Greek and Roman lives as a single book, it would be without doubt on our list.
Yes, which it was, by the way, in that's how it was presented.
But unfortunately, for us, it's never published as such now, and therefore my question is, and it's a difficult one, which is which one I would prefer, because the Romans to me
there are other sources,
but there are more sources. So controversially, for me, I think if we were going to have to pick one, and this is a completely arbitrary thing, Plutarch's Greek lives, because the Romans we can get in Suetonius and Tacitus.
I absolutely agree with that, and I think it's a crying shame. I've got all of these. There are 4 or 5 different Penguin Classics collections, and disastrously, in my view, they've divided them up into the Greeks. I think it's Athenians, Spartans, and then earlier and later Romans. So you don't get the parallels, and you don't. I don't think they even publish the bit at the end of each pairing that Plutarch does, where he explicitly compares and basically says, Alexander could totally take Caesar on this, but Caesar was better on this. So you're losing quite a lot there, actually.
The point of the book.
The point of the book. Don't worry, if you do a little bit of research, you can find editions where you get both, and I would strongly recommend that you go with those editions if you can dig them out. Yeah. So how did you find the Caesar bit? Because we've got lots of lives of Romans, as you say, from Plutarch, and when we come on to our wild card Suetonius, we've got lots of other imperial lives as well. But here we've got, in Julius Caesar, we've got Plutarch on Caesar, we've got Suetonius on Caesar, and we've got Caesar on Caesar. So we've got 3 different bites at the cherry.
How
do you compare them?
I mean, Caesar on Caesar is brilliant. I mean, Julius Caesar, when you think about it, one of the great, he is up there with Alexander.
Yeah.
How would we feel if we had an autobiography of Alexander? I mean, we need to stop for a second and be amazed at the fact that not only did Julius Caesar conquer Gaul, kill 1 million Gauls, save another one, half the population, change the world's history as we knew it, created the Roman Empire, everything. But he wrote a book.
And a good book. It's a good book.
He wrote a ripping yarn about his military exploits, which we still have in totality. So,
which would probably be a very well-considered, famous book had it been written by someone who wasn't Caesar. I mean, it's written in the third person, by the way, isn't it?
And it's great. And
the only person I could think of that comes close is Churchill, who, by the way, grew up with all these stories. He loved his Plutarch, etc., etc. Because he wrote his own history. He famously said, "History will judge me kindly because I intend to write it," and he was clearly a figure of world historical importance. I did consider pairing Caesar and Churchill, actually, but it doesn't really make sense because they're in such different historical contexts.
As a nation, the Gauls are extremely superstitious, and so persons suffering from serious diseases, as well as those who are exposed to the perils of battle, offer, or vow to offer, human sacrifices, for the performance of which they employ druids. They believe that the only way of saving a man's life is to propitiate the god's wrath by rendering another life in its place, and they have regular state sacrifices of the same kind. Some tribes have colossal images made of wickerwork, the limbs of which they fill with living men. They are then set on fire, and the victims burnt to death.
Caesar, he's ripping yarn. Most people haven't read him, but have heard of him. But he has given us these famous sayings that we use all the time. He's in very Vini Vidi Vici, I came myself conquered.
And he had to ask, is he deployed in that bar?
Perhaps less well known, but the die is cast.
Very pithy. I mean, and the whole book's like that.
And that phrase, whilst you might not have come across it, is often used until the title of TV episodes.
Yeah.
It's a word. And he has this amazing sense of self-publicity. He knows he's a talented writer and a talented general. He uses one. For him, it was all about the self-mythologization as he went along.
Because he was sending these books back to Rome in order to build up his support base there.
Exactly. Yeah. By the way, I conquered. I'm being an absolute legend. I'm slightly subverting popular democracy. Or sorry, I'm not saying converting classical democracy in favour of popular democracy. And I've written an amazing book about it, which I'm sure will be a bestseller.
As you say, a ripping yarn, and written
It's like
in a very
Trump
easy
or
style.
Boris Johnson, right?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously Boris Johnson is an author, but it's like Donald Trump,
Who is
writing-
definitely not an
who's
accomplished
definitely not
writer.
an accomplished author. Writing, not just doing what he's doing. And, his tweets, I suppose, are sort of a parallel. He's trying to create his own story, but it's him creating his own story through actually a timeless work of literature.
Yeah, I mean, if Johnson now, in the Queen's speech on Monday, announces an attack on France, and we just go, everything we've got, catch them with their pants down. I mean, we've got a good claim to most of France anyway. I think it's a policy that would have a lot of domestic support, bring the country together after some turbulent years. I mean, God knows they're asking for it. And then led the army himself and wrote the dispatches. Yeah. That's the kind of, and killed half the population of France. That's the level of how hardcore this is. Yeah. That would be the comparison. Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't think that he is going to do. He's just going to announce, a few more teachers and nurses.
I think, I agree with you. I think it's unlikely that gentlemen in London still in bed will hold their manhood cheap. But I do think that if we were to do it, that he would definitely
hold your manhood cheap. Yeah, but exactly. It is extraordinary, and his style is very interesting. He doesn't mess around, does he? He just goes straight for it. You open the book, page 1, line 1.
Gaul is divided into 3 parts.
Boom.
It's compelling. It's simplistic, but absolutely compelling.
Caesar threw his army across the Rhine. Yeah. There isn't a sentence that's more than 5 or 6 words. I think it's throughout the whole thing, which makes it really easy to read. By the way,
and of course, interestingly, he describes what certainly today. I mean, in a word which is annoyingly becoming overused and therefore devalued. It is a genocide. That he is exterminating the Gaulish population.
Did you say 1 million people?
So
from a much smaller population.
The population of Gaul was 4 million. 1 million of whom he killed,
and it wasn't by the end of it.
1 million of whom he enslaved, and essentially 1 million of whom he, was sort of like. Half the
actually
population
shocked people at the time, didn't it?
Yeah.
Although, by the way,
the Romans, even the Romans, who were like, these people don't really count, were like,
that is a bit. Yeah.
I mean, killing or enslaving half the population.
We're talking about France.
Essentially, the whole rest of the world to the west, as we understand it.
Yeah. Well, although I'd say, by the way, again, we shouldn't let Alexander off the hook here. He comes across as such a nice chap. By his own official records, they killed 750,000 Persians in Alexander's campaigns in Persia. That is genocidal levels of given the population.
It's difficult. I mean, genocide is sort of I'm not sure genocide is when you're killing the loss of the people. I think genocide is when you are killing the loss of people because they are those people.
Well, Caesar deliberately wipes out entire tribes.
Yeah. So that's why I think Caesar is genocidal. I think the Persians just got in the way.
But he also,
if you disagree and you're Iranian, please don't write him.
But he's also Caesar. He, like the soldiers of Alexander, he is curious about where he's going. He's not just bigging himself up. He's interested. You get these descriptions of the country that he's marching through, the peoples that he's meeting, what their cultures are like. We don't know how reliable these are, but they're often our first and, in some cases, our only major source of what is going on. And some of it's tantalising. As I say, he describes how the Brits were all moustachioed. He describes how the Germans love to bathe naked, men and women together. Is absolutely scandalised.
And he also gives some of our earliest understanding of the British.
Yeah.
He's like, and the British are weird. They're druids. The sort of painting themselves blue. The
driving chariots still, which
the Wicker Man. All of these things.
Wicker Man.
These come from Caesar.
Yeah, people were burnt alive in Wicker
Man. The Empire, the Roman Empire, did conquer Britain, but there was a long gap. It's basically Caesar had a punt. Went over, conquered over a bit, came home, and it wasn't until Claudius came along, about 60 years later, that they were able to hold it.
And some of it's tantalisingly, has survived. I just think, go back to the German thing. I mean, that's still true, isn't it, of the Germans? This is recognisably the same people. Say what you like about the Germans, any excuse to get their kit off and have a bath in mixed company.
They're more clean-shaven than they used to be.
Possibly. And actually, a friend of mine can describe this accurately because he went to a business meeting in Frankfurt, and it was a kind of conference, round table or whatever, and at the end of it, mixed group of business people. At the end of it, the Germans would just say, "Oh right, off to the baths, chaps." Everyone has to take all their clothes off, and then you're sitting there with the CEO with all these dangly bits there, right sitting next to you, sweat pouring off him, naked as the day he was born.
Yeah.
and his attractive, second in command, she's sitting there on the other side. Now, that as an Englishman, that scenario fills me with an unutterable sense of horror. I cannot imagine. But this guy, he wanted to land the contract or whatever, so he had to go along with it. I don't know what, And he described at the time when he was telling me this horror story, he's there with this beautiful German woman, and basically saying, is it rude to be aroused in this situation, or is it rude not to be?
The past is a different country, and different countries are in fact different countries.
Yeah. And they
do things differently.
They do things differently there, and we did things differently here, as you say, burning people in Wicker Man. That doesn't usually happen now, certainly not within major metropolitan areas, although out in the blue voting constituencies.
The general elections of yesterday, there was a little bit of,
You come here with your metropolitan values, say that we can't burn children in Big Wicker Man anymore. It's political correctness gone mad.
Health and safety gone mad.
Yeah. I'd like to know more about those druids. But yeah, Caesar's the first source we have for them. Really, the only major source.
There's actually a genuine argument that Caesar invented druidism.
Oh really? Just a good story.
This is not real.
That's interesting.
Certainly, the modern druidic movement, which takes itself from Caesar rather than any sort of continuity.
Well, I think it depends who you ask, but I think we can accept that. But interestingly, also,
let's not ask the president to the druid movement. Arthur Pendragon.
If there are any druids listening, we'd be fascinated to know what the hell you think you're doing. Yeah. And do you still do human sacrifice? Because that sounds pretty cool. Anyway, he's quite honest about the fact that the British campaign doesn't really work out for him. He doesn't conquer Britain. He basically conquers Kent. And by the way, he's got a great line. I've got some friends who come from Kent. He says, Kent is by far the most civilised part of Britain. And then, the southeast is sort of the next bit. And then the further north you get, the hairier it gets and the scarier it gets. I think that's basically still true, isn't it?
Yeah, we saw that last night as we watched the election.
Yeah. But then, so it doesn't really work out in Britain. He has to go back to France because the bit that he's just conquered has risen up, right? Yeah. And then there's this, and this is the highlight of it's the sort of climactic focus of the book, isn't it? Where where Vercingetorix leads the revolt. All the Gauls get together. They now know it's half of them are dead already from the earlier campaigns. It's now or never. They're all in now. They are either going to be conquered and enslaved and killed, or they're going to have to fight to the death. And they do, and it is the most extraordinary, even allowing for a bit of exaggeration of the numbers, it was clearly the most enormous sort of final showdown, where you got Caesar and Vercingetorix, and at one stage, I think I'm right in saying, Caesar besieges Vercingetorix, and then another army of Gauls comes and besieges Caesar. So it's like a siege within a siege. They're all running out of food. The Gauls.
It's an epic story. And those looking for shortcuts. We've spoken before about the
Asterix and Gaul.
Well, the HBO Rome series, which begins with the first episode with Vercingetorix stripped naked kissing the Standard.
Yes.
But yeah, Da Vinci is clearly a major source here. Asterix and Obelix. Get a fix. The whole period.
Actually, Asterix in Britain is a genuinely good.
Joking aside, it's probably a good way in for understanding some of the dynamics.
It's amazing.
And there's less genocide and gang rape and
yes, I think that's safe to say. Probably a good thing. But Caesar doesn't pull his punches, and he manages to. He makes you sympathetic towards Vercingetorix. I mean, I think there's the drama of Vercingetorix. Who's in the inner siege, right? And they run out of food. They start gobbling all of the people who aren't really fighters. So the children and the old people, they just eat them. French will eat absolutely anything.
They will.
To be fair. And then he finally realizes the game's up. They do one final attack, they lose, and eventually he says, right, look, I've led you into this mess, we've lost, I'm sorry, I will give myself up. He goes, as you say, and it's done quite well in the Rome series, gives himself up to Caesar. Caesar sort of acknowledges him as an honourable opponent, and then chucks him into prison and later kills him. So it's not quite
garroted in the forum.
Yeah, that bit made me feel. I don't think Alexander would have done that. I think Alexander would have set Vercingetorix up with a nice kind of retirement palace somewhere on the Palatine and invited him to dinner, and they'd have laughed about the old days at Alessio. That for me showed a ruthlessness of Caesar that. Even in the way that he is describing himself, I found that surprising. That
he's playing to the crowd.
He's playing to the crowd.
What Roman people wanted.
Yeah, because they hated the French, hated the Gauls.
And just on another thing, to be fair, he also fucked Cleopatra.
Amazing. Yeah. I mean, to be fair, so did Mark Antony,
and
so did
Cleopatra's
her brother. I mean, But yes, that's good. And he invented July.
Well, he took a month that
No,
existed.
because the
July
intercalendary days, he had to create a month. He had to change the whole calendar. And he also invented a bloody good salad. I think you can't take that away from him. He's a multi-talented individual.
Salad and a more efficient way for getting a baby out of We owe Caesar so much.
Caesar, we salute you.
We salute you. Ave Caesar.
Ave.
More tea.
Yeah.
More tea and a wee.
Tea and a wee.
His affairs with women are commonly described as numerous and extravagant. Among those of noble birth whom he is said to have seduced were Servius Sulpicius' wife, Postumia, Aulus Gabinius' wife, Lollia, Marcus Crassus' wife, Tertulla, and even Pompey's wife, Mucia. But Marcus Brutus' mother, Servilia, was the woman whom Caesar loved best, and in his first consulship he brought her a pearl worth 60,000 gold pieces. He gave her many presents during the Civil War, as well as knocking down certain valuable estates to her at a public auction for a song. When surprise was expressed at the low price, Cicero made a neat remark. It was even cheaper than you think, because a third, Tertia, had been discounted. Servilia, you see, was also suspected at the time of having prostituted her daughter Tertia to Caesar.
Right. Okay, so after a strategic pause and loo break, I can announce that I've done another run to Becky's to stock up for our next round of double Rubicons.
I thought run to Becky's was a euphemism for something I didn't understand. You're announcing the report back from the loo. Or run to Becky's. I don't want to know, but you.
Becky's is a friendly corner shop and source of much of the goodness that we're pouring into our bodies to help cope with the fact that we've been awake and I'd say drinking, if not thinking, for 24 hours now. I'm feeling a little bit strange, but pretty positive.
There's been ups and downs.
There's been ups and downs.
It's been an emotional roller coaster.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, seriously, mate, it's been an emotional roller coaster for the guy in Becky's. He's a really friendly Turkish guy. He is suffering. However bad our hangovers are, his is worse, and he's got a 12-hour shift. I was just talking to him, and I was saying, oh, you know what? Seriously, double Rubicon, sort you right out. It's a brilliant hangover cure. And he's like, oh, okay, yeah. All right, I'll do that. I'll take a break and I'll do that. I didn't have the heart to say, I've just bought the last ones in the shop.
And we've gone for lychee.
We went for lychee this time, which I think is sparkling. So I'm not sure I should have served them in martini glasses. I should have probably done flutes, but it's a good drink. That
it's fine. What are you mixing with?
So I did a different gin this time to give it a bit more kick. One of those old school Geneva kind of like Dutch gins. I think it cut through it a bit more. This is a serious drink. This is a man's drink.
Yeah.
And it's a drink for anyone of any gender who has been up for 24 hours and desperately needs a pick me up. Anyway, the other thing, it's quite fun out there. You haven't been out yet. There's obviously it is an apocalyptic wasteland. You can hear the screams.
Just for clarification, I think we've said this before. It's been a long night. We are in Islington North.
Yeah.
Jeremy Corbyn's seat. Obviously, successfully re-elected to that position.
He's a very good constituency MP.
He's just a constituency MP. However, it has not been the best night for Corbyn or Corbynism.
No, but it was interesting. You can hear people chatting about it in the shop and stuff. And like, well, actually, I was thinking about the election and thinking about Caesar and what things were like back in the day. But actually, this is people saying, oh, nothing's going to change, or oh, this is an amazing watershed. Okay, the stakes. However high people might think the stakes were in the 2019 UK general election, for those involved, the stakes are nothing compared to even just an ordinary consular election in 1st century BC.
Yeah,
I mean, thinking about the parallels, and we've mentioned a few of them, but if we were back, if this election had happened in 1st century BC, Jeremy Corbyn would just have been beheaded in front of his family, right? There would have been, the
hands nailed to the Parliament.
To the rostrum, yeah. We would have had Len McCluskey and Seamus Milne would have retreated to the hills of Islington North, pursued by Dominic Cummings, who would have literally made them fall onto their swords.
Yeah, attempting to raise a legion from the Red Wall to find all declared for Caesar.
Yeah, exactly. We'd have had the Appian Way would have been lined with Momentum supporters screaming and crucified. I like to think Owen Jones he'd have been spared and just sold into slavery. Joe Swinson and Jess Phillips, who obviously we're a big fan of on this podcast, I think they would be spared, but merely made to bow
before Bojo and vote him in as dictator
It'll be
for life.
interesting to see, following the Jess Philippics, whether indeed Miss Phillips rises to prominence. Will she become?
Well, she
She could make a run for the leadership.
she good.
And of course, if she becomes Prime Minister at any point, which I find unlikely, but we live in a very strange timeline, we may need to, of course,
we need to delete that. We'll definitely have her on there. But yeah, and then but Boris now stands, having swept all before him in a position of power. But again, we're not talking about the kind of power that
it's all
Caesar
down
is
to
for.
Horace.
Yeah, but obviously Caesar is now standing triumphant, bestriding the world. But actually, as we're about to find out, it's not going to carry on going his way forever. And who knows, maybe it won't carry on going for Bojo's way forever. Et tu go thee, you never rule out. It's just the moment where you think you've vanquished your enemies that actually the enemy within come for you.
It's certainly been a fascinating few years, and I think if we want to parallel with Rome and the end of the Republic, the sort of churn, all the stuff we're going to look at in Suetonius now.
Yeah.
This really has been, although the stakes are much lower, as you say, a fascinating time in British politics. I mean, the twists and the turns.
And no one has seen it coming, including the experts, let's be honest.
Yeah.
The experts listening, right in. I think no one, on any side, predicted what has happened overnight. And once again...
Or over the last 3 years.
Or over any of it, yeah. It's absolutely fascinating. But yes, so Suetonius, you mentioned Suetonius. Now, Suetonius is one of my favourites. Absolute legend. Well, and it turns out, I've been doing some research, he was a legend. First thing about him, I didn't know this. He was African. He was from North Africa.
Yep.
That is the second African in our list.
He's probably a Romano-African.
Sure.
It's not clear. I mean, the Romans didn't really care.
Interestingly,
about that. They didn't really have a concept of race.
They weren't racially,
So we don't
they had slavery. They had, the deep, problems in their society, but not racial ones. I think.
Yeah.
You can
I mean, we don't know if he's a black African. We just don't know really, actually, because it's not the sort of thing that the Romans really kept track of.
Right.
But he's from a Roman colony. What, Libya?
I think Libya, Algeria. And by the way, this is another interesting thing. Some of the emperors, the later emperors that are written about in his works, in the works that follow on from him, may have been back. Priscinius Niger, but we don't know because Romans don't think it's terribly important, so they don't really talk about it. The Severan dynasty. From Africa, from Libya, some of the better emperors. It's interesting now, Suetonius, but this is right. He really was a legend. We're not just talking about a dry biographer here, and I think that comes through from the style. But to my amazement, it turns out Suetonius shagged the Emperor Hadrian's wife while Hadrian was emperor, and he got away with it too.
I mean, presumably a dynastic marriage. There wasn't a lot of love.
Sure, I mean,
even so,
still,
it's about honour and dignity, isn't it?
You would not have wanted to be Mrs. Hadrian when the slave burst in and caught them at it or whatever.
If you're the emperor's wife, I think maybe you're even better behaved. No,
you've got to bet. Yeah. Well, of course, Hadrian was in love with
certainly
Antony,
after Caligula and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there's been, as Suetonius himself has recorded, you do not mess with this stuff, but obviously it didn't hold him back.
Yeah, Hadrian is in love, as you say, with
this is Hadrian as in the wall, by the way. He built a big, beautiful wall to keep out the Scots. Something that maybe Dominic Cummings, if you're listening, you might want to think about. Sturdy, woad-clad nutters.
So he built a wall, but when he got
made him pay for it.
Did he lock him up?
No, so Suetonius, I think he was sent into exile or something. I mean, it wasn't a good career, but he wasn't.
Where is Bithynia?
Bithynia is basically northern Turkey. It's a sort of the crappy kind of resort areas of northern Turkey now.
Yeah,
I think
where everyone is always sent on exile.
Yeah. But anyway, so he's a complete legend. And amongst his works, which unfortunately not all of which survive, he wrote Lives of the Poets, which is something, this is an influence on Dr. Johnson, who we're going to come to later in the series.
And the work where he's most famous for, and we are looking at, which is the Lives of the 12 Caesars.
The 12 Caesars.
And that's 12, counting Julius Caesar as
number one. Yeah. Right. He doesn't quite go up to Hadrian and the era in which he is living, which is probably quite sensible given the politics. But he also wrote a sequel which was Lives of the Prostitutes. And I just love this idea that Suetonius, he's talking to his literary agent saying, Lives of the Caesars is selling like hotcakes. What else can we do? Anyway, you can get me in advance to go and do some research into Lives of the Prostitutes. I'd be bang up for that.
I mean, we understand why he as an author might be interested in going to do that research. For his art, obviously. But and your readership, that's like when J.K. Rowling says she's going to write as Robert Galbraith or something. It's like, I wanted to try something really different. Okay, well, I wanted another book about wizards or whatever it is she writes about. It's a hard sell, but to go from Caesars to the prostitutes,
an odd move. Unless he did it first.
Unless he was going to draw some some parallels.
Well, it's interesting. So his style is very much sensational. I mean, he is. I think of it as like a very talented kind of Sun journalist writer who's just looked at Wikipedia and is regurgitating it in a way that is sensational. But I mean that as no disrespect whatsoever. It is an amazingly good read. And he does a life of Caesar, which we'll come to in a minute. But he then carries on with, as you say, the next 11 emperors. There's Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, right, Claudius,
Nero, and then the four.
And then the year of the four emperors. But
Otto, Vitellius,
Galba,
and
Vespasian.
Yeah.
And I think he then does Titus as well. So, but this is great because as we go through this and we get further away from the high politics of the Caesar era, which we'll come back to in a second, it just becomes more and more decadent and more disgraceful. And so, you start off, you get through Augustus, so it's all about the politics interesting, and then you get to Tiberius.
Well, Augustus is a kind of back to basics.
Yeah.
So people mocked him at the time for him trying to resolve more. I mean, Augustus genuinely does seem to actually want to reform the Roman state.
He does.
He seems ideologically
interested in
making it better. He sorts it all out. He's a founding father. He's got this vision of what he wants to do, and he cares about all aspects of life. It's about reform. He sort of does want a better deal for the average Roman. He's worried about the slave balance, because obviously all of this takes place in the context, which we sometimes forget, about 30 years after the Spartan revolt.
Right, they're worried about that. Yeah.
The Roman aristocracy, because it wasn't clear that they were going to successfully put it down. And Caesar himself was a soldier in that campaign.
Is that right? I've forgotten that. And Pompey basically helped put it down, didn't he?
And Crassus, who's so I think we can sometimes forget what's going on in the rest of history, even in the local history. So because of that, Caesar and then Augustus rise with this shadow of actually making things better. At that point, it's kind of weapons free on the emperor, so to speak, as in the people who were born into it. I mean, Tiberius wasn't really his adopted stepson; he was already alive when
he was general, wasn't he?
Yeah. So, but from that point on, the moment that you sort of have the people being born into what has become the imperial family, even though it's probably not yet referred to as that, it hasn't quite developed.
It's a fucked up family.
There you go, mental.
I mean, even your family's weird.
There you go, mental.
Wow.
The sort of behaviour that they get up to would have been totally unacceptable in Roman society even 40 years earlier.
Well, and Augustus himself would have been horrified about it. I mean, we've already, on a separate podcast, we've talked about Ovid being sent into exile because he's a shagger. And sorry, we are actually podcasting. That's actually a beautiful thing. So for our listeners, the bacon butty tray has just been brought in. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Genuine breakfast of champions. Is there any chance that he mayonnaise? No, it's all right. Fine. It's fine. No, it's fine. And then just next time. Anyway,
thank you.
Sure, we're promising. This is a true breakfast of champions.
Absolutely.
Just what I needed. It hits the spot, doesn't it? So, I'm having many flashbacks now. I'm so tired. I've been waiting for long. So Tiberius is where it all starts going wrong. I mean, things that he was getting up to, according to Suetonius, in that swimming pool in Capri. Oh my god!
I've never been to the palace. I really want to go.
Oh yeah, it's worth going.
I'm trying to persuade my young lady to go on a holiday again to Italy and take to Capri, but I'm not sure she will really understand my facet. I mean, Capri's also a beautiful place.
And we've still got Tiberius' leap, where he used to chuck people over he was pissed off with them over the cliff.
So, I think it is you make an interesting point there, according to Suetonius, because there is an argument for it. Suetonius is essentially writing his book to get in with the new dynasty.
Which he literally did with the new dynasty's wife. But
it is important to understand that we talk about dynasties and royal families, and it isn't really like that. Caesar is not an emperor. Augustus, when we talk about him being the first emperor, what he does is he simultaneously occupies a number of key positions, which previously have not been able to be held by the same person, which concentrates all power, so that he effectively is the one-man state. But he does it all
It's a bit like Xi Jinping in China, isn't it? Yeah. He's not the emperor, but he just but he's just like the head of the committee for public safety, and he's also the head of the army.
And I think actually also another analogy, if you're interested in that sort of thing, is Scientology, where David Miscavige is basically, he is not the spiritual head of the church, but he owns the copyright on all of the works and books and things. So he's sort of chairman of the board, and so over time, and he transfers all of those positions. The one-man access to the state to his stepson, Tiberius, and thereafter that becomes sort of dynastic. But it's always done in the early days through the legal fiction that the Republic still exists, and all of these positions are.
And the Emperor sort of stands for consul some years and stuff like that, doesn't it? It's interesting.
But it's probably Tiberius certainly, but probably Caligula, where it first becomes understood as essentially a king. But they hate that term. So they're all related to Julius Caesar, the Julio-Claudians as they're known. Albeit that they're not normally sons in taking over from them, but they're all sort of related. And then
they're all secret with each other as well.
And the new dynasties, where there's, as we've just said, the year of the four emperors, there's a massive break. Nero, the last of that family, sort of is overthrown.
He's murdered.
And the question is, who is going to take over? Are they going to go back to a republican system?
Yeah.
Not really ever considered. People go, eyes on the prize, I can now essentially be king.
Well, and a lot of these people say, the generals start declaring themselves, but they do it, again, they're still paying lip service. So they're saying, I'm going to restore the republic, but with myself as the...
So Titus, and that will swing in, and the point, I think the point was that there is a discussion going on amongst the patricians, but also more generally the people of Rome, which, well, hold on, now that the Julio-Claudians are gone, shouldn't we be going back for restoring the Republic? It's almost like everyone accepted that Caesar's family, Augustus's family, were going to be the first citizens, the people in charge.
Right. But once they're gone,
the justification that there should be
is harder.
Is harder. And I think Suetonius enters this, and his Life of the 12 Caesars is essentially designed that after Augustus and Caesar, who are generally come out of it quite well, and set the whole system up. The argument is pretty much that everybody else has abused the powers and have been terrible, but the idea itself is quite sound, and by the way, the new guys are much better.
Oh, that explains that,
we've got to be careful.
It's not Republican sympathies necessarily, it's certainly not openly in any way. It's,
but it was sort of Augustan. We've got to be careful, though, therefore, that everything that is said, much as I love this, I love finding out all the terrible, dirty stuff that's going on, how much of it's true is a difficult question, not least of all because the vested interest is writing in order to discredit that leadership.
Well, bear in mind, as we're going to come to on a subsequent, sorry, I've got a face full of bacon butter here. When we come to Tacitus, there are other sources that suggest that some of these emperors really they had gone off the reservation. I mean, okay, we can argue about Tiberius, but Caligula was clearly an absolute fucking nutjob. He's shagging his sisters. He makes a horse a senator,
and then he just invites all the noble women of Rome up to the palace and makes them prostitute themselves, and the money is used to repay the deficit. Now, it's a consideration that
it's going to be in the Queen's speech.
Queen's speech next week. If you are, one of the blue-blooded, British aristocratic women, you may be required.
This might be a good time to flee the country. And then just when you think it can't get any worse, Nero comes along. This is according to Suetonius, and again, he's got some serious issues. He's got some mother issues. I think you could safely say, like according to Suetonius, he has sex with his mother and then kills her with a deliberately constructed collapsing boat, as you do. And then he decides to basically burn down Rome so that he can have more space for his palace.
He had decided, in other ways, they all failed. The collapsing boat was a last failed. We need to just point out.
It's Nero with a collapsing boat.
Nero burning Rome is generally not held by most.
He had a good fiddle while it was happening.
Yeah.
Now, you may not know this, but so Suetonius wrote Lives of the 12 Caesars, and it is cracking fun, and then the Caligula and the Nero lives are particularly entertaining. He then stops short. He doesn't risk doing Life of Hadrian, but unnamed successors, who we might call pseudo-Suetonius, carry on the series, and they carry on the series for quite some time, and it is definitely worth a read. You get some really good emperors like Hadrian and Trajan, who's my favourite, but you also get into the decline of the Roman Empire, and you get some absolute smashers. And the one to read from the late pseudo-Suetonius, The Life of Elagabalus. Now, So Elagabalus, I think he's my favourite emperor of all time. A true legend. So he's 3rd century. So it's beginning to sort of crumble a bit at this stage. A series of emperors.
It's before the Diocletian reform.
It's before the Diocletian reform, but a series of emperors. We've had a year of the 5 emperors. We've had a series of emperors being murdered by their Praetorian Guard, and basically no one's lasted for very long. And eventually, the empire is given to Elagabalus, who is 14, right? And he clearly sort of takes the view. Right, I've been given the empire. It's only a matter of time if I'm brutally murdered by someone, my own guards or whatever. I'm going to have some fun with this. And he comes across extremely well, which is not how he's supposed to come across, because he comes across as a sort of intelligent, aesthete, dandy psycho, like a kind of cross between Oscar Wilde and Hannibal Lecter, I like to think of him, but also what we would call nowadays a trans figure. So he is, he cross-dresses, he identifies as a woman, he explores the idea of having surgery, not just to castrate himself, but to create a vagina. You think about Noah's anaesthetic would have been involved in that. That really brings tears to eyes.
Nero was gender fluid as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of this about him.
And he took a slave, and
did have that surgery done. Yeah,
because the slave looked like his wife Poppaea, who he had kicked to death when pregnant.
Obviously,
he felt a bit of regret about that. He found someone who looked a bit like chopped his cock off,
and had the doctor's also constructed the
woman. It was
amazing,
very odd,
very very strange. I mean, as I say, he had some serious issues.
Let's make it clear. I'm not making any judgment about trans or people wearing clothes or anything like that. But these were socially transgressive at the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's very easy at the moment. There's a lot going on where people say, "Oh, actually, our ideas of binary, gender are new things." No,
there's nothing new under the sun. There is nothing new under the sun. But I love the idea of sort of sitting around. Oh, do we call him or her? Yeah, you call him Caesar because he did not take shit from people. So the first thing he does is he starts going around Rome. In a gold carriage drawn by 4 naked women, right? He starts throwing the most extraordinary feasts. It starts bankrupting the empire, kind of orgiastic feasts. He's got bizarre parties where he invites only people with one eye or only people with one leg, and then it all turns into an orgy at the end. And then while people are going at it in the orgy, he deliberately releases lions and panthers and bears into the rooms, and the Suetonius sort of has this classic kind of comment that says, not all of the guests survived the night. No shit. He has crazy.
The Europeans love that kind of stuff. That's sort of their television programs. It's like Jeremy Beadle gone higher. You can just imagine that somewhere in Bithynia now they're going go to television and people staying in a holiday home and it's someone releases a panther and films on TV.
I would watch that. And he also does great things, like he has a competition to see who can collect the most spider webs, and some absolute legend manages to collect £10,000 worth of spider webs and then, is given a talent of gold or whatever. He marries 5 women and 2 men,
at the same time.
Yeah. So all bets are off, basically. And when he marries
transgressive, because Romans didn't have a...
Right, and when he marries the men, he makes them he's described as the wife, or the empress. So, again, this is deeply transgressive. And then the other thing he says is he had a thing for chaps with big cocks, shall we say. He apparently had great lust for them. He loved taking it in every orifice, is what Suetonius says. And he started to appoint them as favourites to all of the main positions of state, so, consul and stuff. And the result of this was that all of the people who had previously been doing well or hoped to do well politically, who had small cocks, got together and created the small cock party to start plotting the inevitable murder. And I think there, again, we've got some real echoes for today, haven't we? I mean, that is the story of history, isn't it? The people with the small cocks getting together to stop the people with the big cocks having the fun. Well, and I think, on this one, you and I would be on different teams here, wouldn't we? Let's face it, politically speaking.
Parliament has returned. Line up. We're going to appoint the cabinet. Go on the trousers, boy.
Yeah, extraordinary. Anyway, Elagabalus, an absolute legend, and I think we salute you.
Absolutely.
Good work, sir.
But at the risk of being transgressive myself, let's leave Pseudo-Suetonius for a second and return to actual Suetonius.
Yeah. He raped a Vestal Virgin, and then this is Elagabalus. And obviously the punishment for a Vestal Virgin ceasing to be virgin was to be buried alive. So it's like a double whammy of, this is the most deliberately psychopathic thing. I mean, and another thing about Elagabalus, he says other things, and he's just taken over. He's 14, remember. He says to all of the sort of senior people, aristocrats, bring the most attractive children to the capital, and they get to think, okay, that sounds good. They'll be pages or whatever. They'll be part of the inner circle. And then he sacrifices them to the gods. Mass human sacrifice, just to kick things off. You can imagine.
Gods. So
Now this is interesting. Yeah. And perhaps most controversially of all,
before the Edict of Milan, but before the Peace of the Church, we're at the back end of paganism, aren't we?
Yes, we are. And he, perhaps most controversially of all, introduces...
Because human sacrifice hadn't been practiced by the Romans for a lot. I mean, there's some evidence that maybe in the 1st century BC,
if you go back,
they had buried. They think they found some skeletons of 4 Gauls underneath the Forum.
Oh, really?
And that itself is so odd because it was a famine or whatever, but it had been such a late human sacrifice.
That's very odd.
Previously, like Etruscan.
There's a whodunit in that, actually. Sorry, yeah, that's interesting.
But the idea is, oh gosh, in the 1st century they've done this. That's weird and a bit dark, but the 3rd century...
and doing it to the outside, I mean, that was not been good for his poll ratings, I think you can safely say, when that story came out. I mean, he was on borrowed time once he'd done that, amazing he lasted 3 years. But, very odd. But he was sacrificing Sol Invictus. So I think he was a priest or priestess in his parlance of Sol Invictus, the invincible sun. So we're talking about new gods coming in here. It's late era. It's really...
We get Hellenization, we get Mithras.
Right, but this is interesting as well. So actual Suetonius is, I think I'm right in saying, the first mention, outside the Bible or whatever, of Christianity. So he has a little throwaway line back in the life of Nero where he says, oh, there are a bunch of superstitious nutters running around.
Yes, you get a reference in Tacitus as well.
Okay.
Who describes it, there's a great line actually, which is they were the followers of Christus who had been executed under the procuratorship of Pontius Pilate.
Okay, so he mentions Pontius Pilate.
Yeah, and from then the pernicious superstition had travelled to Rome, the capital, where all things unseemly collect and find a vogue. It's a great line. Suetonius does mention there is some question with both of those texts about whether they are later interpolations. The monks copying them out, stick something in so that there is some historical evidence. I think the general consensus now is that they are genuine comments, but they may have been redacting.
Okay, so, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
It's the same with Josephus, where he mentions briefly Jesus of Nazareth, but then at some point goes, he was the Christ. An unlikely statement for Josephus to have made. And
Josephus was Jewish, wasn't he? This is the Jewish Roman historian.
Yeah, also around at the same time.
Quite a good read, actually. We haven't got it on the podcast.
Which is a real shame. I mean, Antiquities of the Jews is quite a long book, but his book Jewish War is absolutely brilliant. And I think it's a bit of a shame I didn't make it to the list because I'm a great fan.
I mean, basically, fucked up shit has been going on in the Middle East for a long time, hasn't it? It's
but they overlaps with the dynasty that we're talking about. The Flavians are here,
right? The people that Suetonius talks about. Do you want another double roux combo?
Absolutely,
they're smashing these, aren't they?
But back to Suetonius himself. We were supposed to be talking about Caesar.
We were. Sorry, Anabasis has hijacked us again.
Yeah, his spiritual descendant. I'm not so sure they would have got on well. Caesar himself is a legend. I want to make that clear. Whilst he doesn't have, naked women pulling him around and pointing the big box and stuff.
No, but you know what? Caesar swung both ways, a bit like Alexander. Caesar, there was a scandal, which I think is in Suetonius, where he says when he's really young, before he's powerful, he goes to Bithynia, your favourite place, and he gets basically fingered by the king of Bithynia, and everyone's sort of sniggering about, oh yeah, Caesar. Oh, and he keeps sort of going back to Bithynia. Oh, we all know why you're going back to Bithynia, Caesar. So he's.
But it was just men hanging around, just locker room fun. They didn't mind that sort of stuff. But they did mind it where Caesar was considered to be the submissive one, wasn't it? That was the
that's the problem.
Yeah.
There's a good story about him on the way to Bithynia, though.
Oh yeah.
Which is in Suetonius. About the pirates.
This one? Oh well, yeah. That's what I wanted to say.
Okay, right.
Okay, so
sorry, I thought I didn't want to miss that because it's smashing.
Because I want to talk about how Caesar's an absolute legend, and as I say, he comes out of Lives of the 12 Caesars very well.
Yeah.
So he's on his way to Bithynia, captured by pirates.
As
it happens, we've all had it on the ferry over to Calais and get some cheap wine, and then pirates come from out of there, and but he's such a gentleman about it. And essentially, he's being held there. And he's getting on very well. He's a very urbane man, was Julius Caesar.
Yeah.
And he befriends the pirates, but not in a kind of Stockholm syndrome kind of way. And he's sort of like cracking jokes them when they say how much they're going to, ransom him, which is like, I think it was 20 talents or something. He's like, you need to ask for at least 50. I'm an aristocrat.
I'm worth more than that.
Yeah, I'm the Julius. People will pay a lot more. And then he goes, but by the way, when I'm released, I am going to come back with going to raise a navy. I'm going to come back. I'm going to find you all and crucify you personally. I'm going to see it done. I will see all of you on crosses. And they're like, yeah, great. Obviously you're not, because that's an empty threat. And B, I thought we were getting on quite well now. So they do.
It would be against the pirate code anyway, wouldn't it?
More of a guideline. So, certainly not against the Roman code. Because it turns out, 50 talents is paid. He goes, thanks very much. And they go, great, Caesar, you're brilliant. We'll promise not to kidnap you again. Thanks. What's a nice man? And off they go to sea. And then, indeed, Caesar rises in Bithynia, raises a navy. Because piracy is a real problem in the Mediterranean Sea, because obviously it's the hub of transit for.
Pompey has to put it down, doesn't he? Yeah.
So and he does come back, and he manages in a short time afterwards to track down every single person involved in the whole thing, and have them all crucified. And you can just imagine they were like, "Oh, who's that guy? Oh, it's the Romans. Oh, but it's Caesar."
Yeah.
I'm like, what? What? I just love to see the thought process as they suddenly realise, oh, he meant it.
He actually meant business. Yeah, surely there would have been a moment where they were like, oh, Caesar, Johnny James, we were quite good to you, weren't we? You didn't actually mean that thing you said, did you?
Yeah, for every single... And as for ruthlessness...
well, that's it. It's the combination of ruthlessness and style.
Yeah, style, patience, just calm. You never got the impression Caesar got angry about anything. Even when he was sorting a quarter population of Gaul. And getting Vercingetorix and stuff. It was never personal.
He was cool as a cucumber, wasn't he? And now, cool, that's another thing. I mean, because I think it's actually Plutarch who tells the pirate story best, but Suetonius nails something which I think is really interesting, which we can perhaps appreciate now in a way that for 2,000 years people have not been able to appreciate, which is the idea of Caesar as someone who's cool. He hangs out with a kind of counterculture in Rome. We've been talking about some of the poets and stuff in other podcasts. He wears his toga in a particularly sort of controversial, racy way. He
was also, probably for political gain, but he's on the side of the people, isn't he?
Yeah.
And he takes positions as tribune of the plebs, I think, at one point. And so he sort of deliberately...
It's populism!
Yeah, he deliberately caught...
What could possibly go wrong?
But he deliberately caught the idea that despite the fact he's a wealthy aristocrat and doing all these racy things, he's also incredibly popular with people. And I suppose, if we want to get political after 30 hours of being awake, there is something of the Boris Johnson. Obviously, Johnson is not racy in his style.
They're both shaggers. I mean, people celebrated the fact that Caesar was a shagger. When he marches into Rome, his troops are kind of going, lock up your daughters and wives.
They look, but they look completely different.
He didn't know how many kids he had.
No one thinks of Boris Johnson as cool in that way, as aesthete.
No, right.
But I think when we've just looked at the Red Wall collapse and the and the North declaring and the swing of the working class vote, to Johnson.
It's not because they don't know that what he's like.
They know he's a shagger.
Yeah.
They know that he is a patrician, if you like.
Yeah.
And people will go, oh, well, what, and it's been interesting to hear the online discussion where the sort of Labour supporters have been saying, I don't understand how that someone can look at the Eton and Oxford educated Boris Johnson. And it's like, because the people don't mind him, like him. He's funny, he's popular. They think he's on their side in a way that they don't think.
About all the other people who were educated at Balliol and at Oxford.
But the work, for Jess Phillips, for example, they don't look at her and go, yes, she speaks for me. But they think this guy does. I think
she needs to polish her rhetoric, as we
she's also sort of bought them off with wealth, but I really think there's a parallel.
Well, there's a parallel in the mind of Boris Johnson. I mean, let us not forget. I think it's one of the great things about Plutarch. It is highly influential. It's given me the Alexander complex that I've got, the Caesar complex that you've got. It did the same for Boris Johnson. I mean, people, and indeed,
Church Augustus complex, rather than
sure, that's fair. But people have been reading this stuff ever since and wanting to emulate these characters that are portrayed by Plutarch, and it looks, because we've got evidence from Caesar, from Suetonius as well. They really did think about themselves in this way. They were self-mythologizers. They were people living in a grand style on a great stage, at 100 miles an hour. The stakes were incredibly
And
high.
like Johnson, for example, Caesar as a writer.
Yes,
wrote
yeah.
history books.
Absolutely.
I'm
not sure people are going to be reading 72 Virgins in 2,000 years, to be fair. But, my mum's in that.
Oh, really?
Not as one of the 72.
In terms of Caesar being a shagger, though, of course, his most famous, and not knowing who his children are, his most famous potential illegitimate son,
Pompey's daughter, doesn't
well,
he?
he's married to Pompey's.
But that's odd as well. It's a very incestuous sort of...
But and Pompey's married to his daughter Julia. But but it's Brutus.
Right, yes.
Marcus Junius Brutus, not the Marcus Junius Brutus who killed Tarquinius Superbus and overthrew the kings, but his descendant was the same name.
But this is something I love as well, because so Brutus, and I don't know if we've done this before, he was played magnificently in the Rome series that you sent me. Can't remember the name of the actor. He's,
Toby Mingus, Menzies as he
it's
accepts.
brilliant, and he does this tortured performance, isn't it? And he gets it right, because Brutus, and we've got Brutus's life from Plutarch. He's this tortured intellectual. This is where the character in Shakespeare
in that. In Shakespeare, we went to see.
It was Wishaw, wasn't it?
It was Ben Wishaw, because that was the first play ever at the New Bridge Theatre.
It was. That was really good. We've got the Caesar, Make Rome Great Again baseball cap here.
Yeah.
But it's great, and so Brutus, as you say, he's got the same name as the guy who killed the last Roman king 400 years previously. And as a result of that, because of the weird way the Romans think,
Caesar is sort of becoming a king, or they're worried he's going to make himself a king.
Exactly. He's got the dictatorial.
Kings are back. Oh no!
What do we do with kings? We get someone called Brutus to kill them. So graffiti starts to appear all over Rome, saying, "Come on, Brutus, what are you waiting for?" And I just love that. I love the idea, and that is a better quality of political graffiti. I mean, these days, Brutus sucks cocks, But I just think that was really moving, and it reminded me of
the idea that people, basically, their job
is dictated by their name. Not to determine
by their ancestors were, and when a situation with a historical precedent arises, you find the appropriate person.
Yeah, cometh the hour, cometh the man who has exactly the right name. It makes sense. But poor old Brutus is clearly saddled with it.
He is saddled with it, but also is saddled with whether it actually is his duty.
Yes, and he genuinely believes. He believes in the Republic, so he really does believe in this. But also potentially, this is definitely a friend of his, a sort of father figure, and possibly actually his father.
Now,
absolutely
amazing. Whether Caesar potentially knew that, whether Brutus knew that, unlikely that he would have think it was.
Well, I think it puts a whole new spin on the death scene, which will come to in a minute. But I'll just say one thing about graffiti, because I think we've spoken before about how used to be some brilliant graffiti in our uni that unfortunately the barbarians painted over. I saw a brilliant bit of graffiti, and this was in the magistrates' court in central London, where I was. This was the last time I was arrested, and I was
last time. They all blend into one now.
They do all blend into one. I'm pretty sure it was the last time, and I was. So I had form by this stage, which is not what you want in these circumstances.
All-man reputation.
And I
was good when the judge says, "Oh, hello again."
Hello again. Yeah, I was hauled before the bag. I was really nervous. I went for a sort of panic poo just before my case came up in the sort of the criminals' loo, and to my amazement, I was sitting there, head in hands, kind of blubbing gently, and I looked up, and some legend had written a brilliant bit of graffiti on the back of the wall that just said, "What then is truth? A mobile army of metaphors and anthropomorphisms." Which is a reference. It's a Nietzsche quote referring to Pontius Pilate, we've just mentioned, and I was absolutely inspired by this. Went back into court and then cross-examined, and I still regret this because at one stage the lawyer cross-examining me sort of ripped my case apart and then said, "Well, that isn't true, then, is it, Mr. Donaldson?" And I should have just taken inspiration and said, "But what is truth? A mobile army of metaphors and anthropomorphisms," and taken my beat. That's what Caesar would have done. Instead, I basically collapsed and cut a deal for a 12-month ban.
One day you would find them.
Anyway, yeah, so good graffiti. But yeah, as you say, so we're coming to the real crunch point here for Caesar. He's about to invade Parthia in the footsteps of Alexander, who he's still trying to emulate. He's standing he's standing supreme, he's standing tall, he's got the world at his feet, but this is the moment, and Brutus is ready to strike. And the scene, which we know from Shakespeare, but Shakespeare is using Plutarch as his source for it, And I think Plutarch just does this absolutely brilliantly, the drama. And if you know that Brutus might have been Caesar's son, I think that puts a whole new spin on the time
Plutarch
to Suetonius at this stage. Yeah, I do. Yeah.
I mean, Suetonius himself, one of the reasons he's such a good read is he's essentially a news of the world style journalist. And I think, we
It's a
talked before,
sensationalizer,
and
isn't
you
he?
used a good analogy once, which is essentially he's got a sort of half-read Wikipedia page.
Yeah.
He's writing a popular history.
Yeah.
Deliberately, and we've used this word a lot over. I think we've used it more in making this podcast than the previous 10 years of my life. Scurrilous.
Yes, scurrilous.
He's writing a deliberately scurrilous, deliberately sensationalist popular history, and his research is not great because he's talking about things which people know anyway.
He's the Tom Holland of his era. No disrespect at all. So, read Tom Holland's Rubicon for this period. It's absolutely smashing.
Well, actually, do you know what I think is and we have already mentioned this, Robert Harris's Cicero trilogy, particularly the first one, which describes consular elections, I think is the best description of what democracy really was like in the late Roman Republic, and how it worked, and how it didn't. And how people were able to manoeuvre themselves into power. Which are absolutely superb. But
would you agree that Plutarch takes it to? I mean, he makes it into an art form. He brings this drama.
Plutarch's a proper historian. Suetonius is the book you buy on the train station waiting a train. He is a W.H. Smith author.
Right.
You have to go to Blackwell's to get Plutarch.
Yeah, I think that's right. But it is just the drama of it. It all comes together. We've got Brutus, who we know from the other life of Brutus, is tortured by it. Doesn't want to do it, but he's come to the conclusion that this is the right thing to do, not just because of his name, but for the Republic. We've got Caesar there, everything standing, trying to create his own myth. He had, in the previous few days, been talking about the fact that he wanted to die well, because that's part of his self-made mythologizing. And he does. I mean, it is amazing. So he's ambushed, effectively, by Brutus and the conspirators, and they stab him. And when he realises what's happening, he doesn't cry out. He's really dignified. He makes sure that when he finally falls, wraps his toga around himself in the right way, so that he looks dignified even in death. That's what his final act. And then this final line, which Shakespeare has immortalised as "Et tu, Brute," and "You, Brutus," but I've also seen it as sort of "and you, my son," which of course has an even greater pathos to it. If there's the possibility that he thought he was his son.
And in Rome, the TV series we've mentioned, that line doesn't exist.
Okay,
it's not in it.
I haven't got to that bit yet.
Oh, okay. Well, sorry, spoilers. Caesar was killed by Brutus.
What? Well, how are they going to rescue the Republic?
Find out in season 2.
Amazing. So, I mean, for me, this is where you really get Plutarch coming through. So, is it time to talk about winners? And unfortunately,
I mean, I think we've dealt with a lot of the shortcut. They just come up in terms
Asterix and Gaul.
Asterix
and Cleopatra, by the way, is Asterix on Cleopatra's list as well? Not
who's not on Cleopatra's list. Yeah, so I mean, we talked about Rome, we talked about Tom Holland's excellent Rubicon, we talked about Robert Harris's Cicero trilogy, which really deals with it.
Yeah, that's really good. There's a good audio books, by the way. There's a great audio version of the Suetonius lives read by Derek Jacobi, who of course plays Claudius in the TV Claudius, which I also recommend.
Was the greatest miscasting of Augustus ever, played by the brilliant.
Blessed. We're a big fan of your podcast, but I'm not sure that you were, given the right role.
The only way I've heard that made sense of is that Claudius thinks of Augustus as a larger-than-life character,
right?
Because in his childhood and in his life, he is this huge, imposing character, which is why Brian Blessed makes sense.
It just so doesn't make sense compared to what Suetonius said. No, I didn't.
Really good stuff. There's also stuff on Netflix. I was flicking through, trying to wrap presents the other day because I'm very, very organised in my
sure,
yeah. Well, a couple of weeks ago.
It's a shame. Yeah.
And
what have you got me, by the way?
My friendship.
All those books that you haven't returned.
So how's my Rome TV series going?
I forgot about that.
So, but they've got a lot of Netflix. This is like the Roman Empire series, and I thought it'd be a documentary, but it's a sort of docudrama that is. I put on season 2, which was like Caesar, doing in weird chronological order, and it sort of has an opening sequence, and it shows, this is Cleopatra, this is, it was all right.
But not as good as the Cleopatra in the Rome series. Yeah. She does a brilliant job of capturing her sort of intelligence and.
But they were trying to basically show Caesar as a young man and how his formative experience and thing is like Caesar as a young soldier. It's like
getting fingered in Bithynia.
Caesar was never one of the common troops who worked his way up. He was an aristocrat.
Well, I tell you who were. I didn't realise this, but the two heroes, I can't remember their names now.
Lucius Vorenus and Titus Pullo.
they're actually mentioned by name.
So they are the only plebs mentioned by name by Caesar, which is why they've taken those names. And that works really well in Series 1 of Rome, where they're sort of on different sides. One's the Republican,
right? In terms of their sympathies, at least.
So well, you know, Polo is the sort of, you know, doesn't care, and he ends up on the sort of Augustan side, and they act as a sort of chorus commentary on what's going on in his way. And it doesn't really work in Series 2 so much, because Series 2 has a lot of structural issues as they try to bring what was going to be 4 seasons worth of material into one.
It's just like the end of Game of Thrones. Just give yourself enough space.
The problem is Rome was made by the same people as Game of Thrones. It's just the most expensive television series made at the time. It was just ridiculously expensive, and it was popular, but it couldn't justify its production.
Right. Anyway, I'm going to put you on the spot of what we say.
Right, so remind me what we've done. Plutarch, Suetonius, Arrian. To Arrian we lose, I think, for me. And it's not because I don't like Arrian, but, you know, Arrian isn't one of the ones which I think before we did this list, I wasn't really even familiar with Arrian. I had to read it for the first time. And it's great, but it's not a classic.
It's great because of what it's talking about rather than what it is. It's as a book.
And most of what we've got we can get from one of the other books.
Well, that's the key point. If it was the only source for Alexander, my God, we would have to have it. But because we've got Plutarch's Life of Alexander as well, and Plutarch covers the same material in a much more exciting way, I think.
So it's a shame, but Arrian is immediately.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Plutarch is hard, Greek and Roman lives, because we're adding them together because they work. You know,
that was how it was originally. But disastrously, the Penguin Classics separate them out, which I think is a real mistake. So please read them as parallel lives. That's what they were supposed to be. And I think Plutarch does a little bit at the end where he does an explicit comparison of each pair, which again the Penguin Classics versions cut out. But you can get other versions. I would urge you to make sure that you either get both sets of the Penguin Classics or get a different edition, so you've got both the Greek and Roman lives.
So it's controversial. Plutarch is the better writer.
Yeah.
The literary conceit of those parallel lives is excellent, and we've got Greek and Roman. I don't want to lose Plutarch.
We can't lose Plutarch. He's not just in my top 100. He's in my top 25. I mean, he's the reason I am the man I am today.
I know, but I love Suetonius' Lives of 12 Caesars. It's one of the greatest books. I mean,
we can't lose Suetonius.
We've talked about this a lot, where we go, oh, you should just pick it up and read it. It's really, really easy. And
you can read it on a
Euripides, that's probably not entirely true.
No. Yeah, you need to take a deep breath before you go into. But
this, Suetonius,
it's like reading the Sun. Isn't it?
It's like reading the Sun. You could genuinely sit on the train. It would not be hard work.
No.
For you to do this, you would not feel, oh, I'm being virtuous by reading classics. You will be amazed at how fresh and contemporary. And
start with Elagabalus if you want to.
Who's not in one of the lives as well, so he's just a reassure.
I think we've got to save Suetonius as well.
So we are into a problem here because we are saving a lot. We are well over our quota. The only thing I can say in that favour is we presume that these classics have come down to us from antiquity because they are brilliant, and therefore they've already been sort of winnowed out by subsequent generations.
That's right. So we can incur a bit of a debt.
We expect that, but when we start hitting,
some of those Brontes are now looking extremely vulnerable, aren't they? Because we've got to keep this under 100.
Yeah, but the 18th century, I think, may end up being quite weak.
Right. But what about Caesar himself? Because
the Gallic War.
Because we've got, as you say, a bit like Alexander, we've got the drama is it's an amazing story, but we've actually got other sources for it. And indeed, Suetonius bases. I think he's obviously basing his life of Caesar on a lot of Caesar's own account.
I mean, I love the fact that we have a book written by Julius Caesar.
Yeah.
I think it's great.
It's amazing,
and it's actually a quite well told thing. It's not stylistically incredible, but
it's very tight. I think it's very stripped down sort of Hemingway style.
I think it's great. Again, it's not a question about whether I think that the Gallic War is worth preserving for future generations. It's whether I think it's worth preserving over Suetonius and Plutarch. To which my answer is, I fear not.
It's controversial. This is your favourite figure from history, has written his own book about that history, and you're losing it, is what you're saying.
I'd say I'm an Augustus man, not a Caesar man, but I think
Augustus wrote some very interesting inscriptions that we still have.
I think I could cope with a line in Plutarch's Suetonius. He wrote. He also composed a history of the Gallic War. Alas, now lost to us.
Oh
which
man,
was tight but not particularly punchy.
Okay.
I could cope with that.
So as long as there's a line in Plutarch mentioning the fact that Caesar wrote his own stuff on, which is an amazing fact, we're going to confine it to the bonfire of history.
I don't want to burn Caesar's work. I'm just.
He'll be spinning in his grave.
That's not the purpose of this podcast.
Henry. By the way, sorry to interrupt this, but we've got some breaking news just coming in. apparently Boris Johnson has just dissolved Parliament and declared himself dictator for life.
Well, we're behind you, Boris. I mean, we're not, but we sort of are. Everyone is behind you today, and we will chase the traitors to the topping rock.
Ave Boris.
Yeah.
And Ave Caesar.
Ave Caesar.
By the way, did I tell you this? Did I tell you the story about Bag-o-ass bugger-ass at the? So when Tamsin,
If we've stopped, can we? I need to just press my computer so I'm appearing online.
no, just 3 minutes on this, which is when Oliver Stone did the film, obviously of Alexander,
Right.
and Robert Lloyd Fox was the historical advisor, Tamsin's tutor at Oxford, and was writing up this book, which was sort of the historical advice for Stone, and was also advising on the script. So he was writing up copies of the script and putting in all the history bits, basically doing the typing because he couldn't type because he's so old-fashioned. This is the world's leading Alexander the Great expert, but actually she was working a lot, so I was doing a lot of it, and I could read. I worked out to read his writing. As a jolly joke, because we were, whenever Bag-o-ass the eunuch turns up, and he's in there quite a lot. Alexander's in love with him, and the autocorrect on the Word document kept changing it to bugger-ass, and as a hilarious joke, I kept that in when I resubmitted it, and she didn't read it, so she didn't change it back. So she submitted it to Laney, who submitted it to Oliver Stone, who then submitted it to Stonewall magazine in America, who knocked up a front page, this is absolutely true, that said, and Alexander also loved bugger-ass. Only then, when they were about to go to print, did someone sort of think, hang on, this cannot be true. And then the call came back down the line, and it finally got to me, gulp. You just said, what the fuck have you done? So, yeah.
It wasn't deliberate.
It wasn't deliberate. No. It's a nice story.
Damn you, autocorrect.
Yeah, but again, it's we can appreciate this now in a way that perhaps for centuries we would not have been able to. The Victorians didn't like this stuff, but Alexander the Great, swung both ways. He swung all 3 ways, and he was in love with the eunuch. It's great.
Yeah, he wouldn't go on with the Elegant Wireless because he quite the opposite. He loved them big.
He did love them big. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not the Greek fashion, apparently. You'd have been fine in ancient Greece.
Well, if you want to feel good about yourself, you just go and walk around Greek statuary, and you just sort of feel slightly smart, don't you?
Yeah, that's true, actually. Anyway, right, it's a wrap. You can go to have a wee.
I just need to, be online.
Right. Yes, we are technically at work today. If bosses, if you're listening, we haven't just been podcasting, having been up drinking for the last 30 hours.